time here at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities that we finished our climate action plan last May that revolved around the mitigation side of climate change and how to reduce our emissions based on the scope. And then we also, at that same time, were able to do our first vulnerability and strength assessment when it came to the climate hazards of the Twin Cities campus. So there was a wonderful work group that was assembled around, as you kind of see here, our infrastructure, our environment, and our campus community. And we, for the last 9 months, have been working on a plan that revolved around these and understanding which parts of our infrastructure, environment, campus community we needed to focus on for the plan. Understanding those vulnerabilities, looking directly at the science of the climate hazards and the existing threats that already existed to those assets. And then essentially this plan is just under its final design. All those, pretty pictures and things got to get put in there. Uh, but essentially, that's going to the Board of Regents in June. So that is what we call part two of our climate action plan. So this platform, the Coffee Chats, gives us a chance. We can hear from some of the experts on and off campus around these areas. And it's really important to really build up the collective knowledge, I would say, around what is climate resilience and how do we take as I like to say, a punch in the gut and come back swinging. So how do we sustain our mission and how do we actually thrive in the face of climate change? And so I just want to welcome all our speakers today and thank Carly for bringing us all together because this conversation is, you see one coffee chat, but we're going to be having a lot of conversations, a lot of action around this in the next 10 years on this campus. So thank you so much. And I will turn it back over to Carly.
Thank you, Kate, for that context. So as you can see, this is part of a much larger initiative around making sure that our campus community and beyond is resilient as possible to the impacts of climate change that we are already starting to see. We barely had any snow this winter, not quite normal for us Minnesotans, so this is really timely. We do have a fairly large panel today that I'm really excited about. And because of that, we're going to ask our panelists to each do a brief introduction of themselves and their work, kind of how it ties into climate resilient infrastructure, whether that be buildings or green spaces. And we are going to ask our panelists to keep to 5 minutes or under for these introductions, just so we have enough time to hear from all five of you and also have some time for our audience to ask questions. We really like this to be a nice dialogue. So I know sometimes folks can be long-winded. I can be too. So I'm going to stop talking and let's just go in the order that we're seeing on the screen, if that is all right with folks. This is in no particular order. But Dr. Andy Erickson, do you want to kick it off for us?
Sure, it would be my pleasure. Good morning, everyone. My name is Andy Erickson. I'm a research manager at St. Anthony Falls Laboratory here at the University of Minnesota. I'm also a professional engineer here in Minnesota. And my research really pursues an understanding of water quality in urban and agricultural watersheds, doing assessment and maintenance of stormwater treatment practices, and trying to develop new stormwater treatment practices to get at removing more pollutants and reducing pollution. Some of the other things that I do, I host a monthly Minnesota Stormwater Seminar Series, which is a hybrid event and serves somewhere between 150 and 250 stormwater practitioners a month. I also sit as a chair of the ASTM International E64 Committee on Stormwater Control Measures, and I serve as chair for the University of Minnesota Water Council. But relevant to this topic, my relation to this topic is that we recently completed a research project studying how urban water managers can mitigate and minimize flooding in response to extreme rainfall events. So thinking about how our urban stormwater infrastructure was designed on historic precip events and how that is changing over time, and what might we do as urban water managers on the landscape to create more resilient communities and at what cost. So we looked at a variety of different scenarios. We evaluated not only what we can do, but some of the underlying assumptions that at first glance might limit the tools that we have in our toolbox. So we're pursuing additional research now to kind of reevaluate some of those assumptions and not limit ourselves to what has been, what I would say, the historic box of tools. So I'll leave it at that for now, and we can go from there.
Wonderful. Thank you, Eric. Or, I'm sorry, I saw your last name. Thank you, Andy. All right, moving on along. Dr. Tom Fisher, go ahead and introduce yourself and your work. Feel free to take the 5 minutes.
Okay, yeah, great. Yeah, Tom Fisher. I'm a professor over at the College of Design, and I direct the Minnesota Design Center, which is a research center in the college that has been going for about almost 40 years now, looking at urban design issues. Although increasingly our work is not only looking across the entire state of Greater Minnesota, we're also starting to work globally. I'll talk about two things that we're doing that might be of interest. One, we've been funded the universities and the regional sustainable development partnerships to work with smaller Greater Minnesota communities around creating more resilient infrastructure and enabling them to compete more effectively for IIJA and IRA federal funds, as well as other bonding opportunities for them, and really trying to help smaller communities think about more resilient ways to think about their infrastructure instead of the kinds of gray, heavy infrastructure that many of them can't afford, to think about how there are landscape-based and land-oriented ways to deal with stormwater, for example. That's one project that's just starting this summer. The other project is a global project that we've been involved in now for 2 years in partnership with Esri, the GIS mapping company in California, and a research institute in Berlin, Germany, LISD, where this has been part of a consortium of about 240 universities called the International Geodesign Collaboration, an organization that I'm the chair of, where we have networked universities around the world doing environmentally related research as it pertains to land development, infrastructure, and what have you. In 2022, we started what's called the Global Climate Geodesign Challenge, which has involved universities around the world looking at ways in which we can begin to measure carbon emissions and carbon sequestration. And so what we've been doing is developing a series of now 143 climate actions with LISD in Berlin that enable us to sort of quantify the climate impacts of our land use and development decisions. And so the idea here is that we've had everything from entire countries like Portugal. We've recently just finished work on the island of Puerto Rico. We have Belgrade, many cities in China, parts of Canada. We've been looking at whole parts of the world and various ecosystems, and have begun to assess the climate impacts of different land use decisions. We're presenting all this at a conference next week in California. And what's exciting to me about this is that there was all this research that was being done in Europe and LISD and other research institutes around climate impacts of decisions, but it had never been spatialized and brought into the tools that we use every day. And so I think what's significant about this work is that we're bringing that research and connecting it to companies like Esri, and Esri also has an agreement with Autodesk. So we're bringing it not only to the landscape, but we're bringing it into decisions related inside buildings in terms of what are the climate impacts of our decisions. And so our long-term goal is to develop a set of geoprocessing tools where that as we are making decisions, materials decisions, development decisions, it will be able to tell us how much carbon we're giving off, how much we're sequestering, and enable us to really factor in our climate impacts in our day-to-day decision-making. We're also starting another phase of this research to look at the impact of these decisions, not only on carbon, but also on biodiversity. And so one of the things we'll be launching starting at the conference next week is an effort to connect all this to biodiversity. We also have, we're starting conversations with the United Nations, the 194 countries in the Paris Agreement have got to re-up their nationally determined contributions related to carbon. And the tools that we've been developing with ESRI are going to be, I think, useful to all of those countries. So the UN is interested in some of this research as well, and making the tools that we've essentially been developing largely here at the University of Minnesota will be internationally, I think, significant in that regard. So maybe with that, I'll stop. Thanks.
Thank you, Tom. I think I speak for both Kate and myself when I say we're going to need to see some sort of a report on the work that you're doing, because I think it sounds fascinating. Up next, I believe we have Andrew. Andrew, want to take it over?
Thanks, Carly, and good morning, everybody. My name's Andrew Caddock. I use he, him pronouns. I am a campus planner in the Planning, Space, and Real Estate Department based in the Twin Cities, but I work system-wide. And I think relevant to the topics today, I can think of two things that I and my fellow planners do that are relevant. One is work on campus plans. And that means strategic, but also physical plans for the long-range development and stewardship of the campus. And I can break that down into a couple of categories too. The planners in planning, space, and real estate lead or co-lead physical campus plans, and with the sustainability team, climate action plans for each of the system campuses. That's in process now. The Twin Cities campus plan was completed a few years ago. Duluth campus and climate action plan was approved last year. I'm currently working with Amanda Cohn from the Sustainability Office on the University of Minnesota Rochester campus and climate action plan. And each campus is unique, but the questions and the challenges are pretty similar. How can we meet our MPAC 2025 commitments to carbon neutrality in the coming decades, and those, but the challenges, the specific challenges in those commitments are very different at each campus. And so the campus and climate action planning teams use some of the research findings and analytic tools that Andy and Tom, in fact, were talking about, and a lot of the work generally at the university. So that's a broad category, campus planning, including participating in climate action planning. And another category of work that the planners do, that I do, is very early scoping of capital projects. And what comes to mind are new buildings or lab renovations. But in my work, my portfolio, I tend to work a lot more on transportation and site and civil utility type capital projects to scope the need, assess the need, and then shape that up into a project that can be funded and implemented. And I see some of my colleagues from capital project management here today, and that's great, because another thing that the planners do in that capacity on capital projects is we help convene the right people to the table. The planners are generalists. We're not deep. We don't tend to be deep on any one topic, but we know a lot of people who are. I happen to be trained as a landscape architect. I'm an alumnus of the College of Design. Tom, thank you for your leadership there. Your continued leadership. But I don't work as a landscape architect at the university. I bring that perspective. But planners are generalists. As I said, they convene the right folks to the table to help ask the right questions for capital projects as they're being scoped. And so some of the capital projects from recent years that I could mention that are relevant here again, several roadway corridor and utility projects on the Twin Cities campus, Pleasant Street reconstruction, where one of the goals was to make the street function better for all modes. Transit and cycling was pretty challenging on Pleasant before the reconstruction. Now I'd like to think it functions a lot better. It's greener, meaning there are more trees. And in fact, there's a passive stormwater collection and reuse system in the median of Pleasant Street, and that helps to irrigate the trees passively. And I think in my participation on Kate Nelson's committee to ask questions about infrastructure and resiliency, that was a topic that Kate, you'll remember that I brought up quite a lot, is passive systems. How can we make sure our systems work even when other things fail, or how can we make our systems work with minimal input maintenance? Some other corridor projects are Pillsbury Avenue, Pillsbury Drive reconstruction in the Knoll, historic area of campus. Lots of complex utilities, including routing chilled water distribution lines from our main energy cogen plant, routing those to buildings, old buildings that for decades had window unit air conditioners, very inefficient. So finding ways to integrate sustainability and energy efficiency aspects into relatively nuts and bolts, some would say even mundane roadway projects is a challenge, a thread that's throughout my work on the Twin Cities. I could go on, but I want to hear what everybody else has to say. Thanks again for having me here today.
Andrew, thank you so much. I'm already thinking of a few questions for you, but I'm going to save those till the end. So up next, we have Jessica.
Thank you, Carly. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us here. My name is Jessica Rossi Mastracci. I'm an assistant professor in landscape architecture. So I kind of come from a large-scale landscape perspective. Before teaching, I was in professional practice in landscape architecture. So I'm a licensed landscape architect. I worked on mainly large-scale public projects, so like parks and waterfronts and urban design, streetscape, that large scale system. So thinking about stormwater, thinking about materials, and thinking about how people are interacting with spaces. My research work right now kind of stems from like a super small portion of that. It kind of ties to what Andrew was talking about with passive stormwater systems and kind of Andy's research with stormwater. So I'm really interested in alternative materials and forms for landscape. So thinking about how we can use site systems, site materials, and site strategies to do lots of things. So there's a type of landscape intervention that I've been really interested in. It essentially just uses stuff found on site. So it uses soil, kind of digging and piling. It uses plants, it uses stones and branches to set up these landscape infrastructures that start to do performative things. So they direct water, they vegetate areas, they manage fire, they collect sediment. They're not designed pieces necessarily. They're used by engineers and land managers and kind of community members. So they're kind of known under like nature-based solutions or some of those systems. I've been calling them land-based infrastructures to kind of like talk that they use pieces from land. I don't know. It's a phrase I kind of I invented. I'm going to see if it sticks. It seems to kind of capture the intent of what these pieces do, because they're formally really simple. They use pieces of land, but when they interact with existing site conditions like slope or soil type or environmental conditions, they start to do really complex things. So they don't just capture water, but they encourage different types of vegetation. They recharge the groundwater, they control erosion, they capture sediment, like they do all these different things, even though their primary purpose might be just to like slow down water. So I'm really interested in these really formally simple things and how we could use them as a design inspiration. So thinking about like, how could we design infrastructures that do multiple things, that are climate adaptable, that the secondary benefits aren't just kind of accidents, but they could be designed into it, both from like a landscape perspective and also an urban design perspective. So while a lot of these interventions are in large scale landscapes, trying to see how some of the forms and the ideas about materials and also the ideas about climate adaptability could be adapted, adapted twice in one sentence, but could be adapted for more urban conditions, because that's where it's really complex, and that's why we're trying to deal with all of these other things. And if we could have landscapes and urban landscapes that had multiple benefits that for both people and the environment, how can we start to design these things? And kind of with that, I'm really interested too in alternative materials. So how do we kind of use different materials, moving away from concrete? Not everything in our landscape needs to be concrete, needs to be super permanent. How do we kind of think about materials different that could both encourage the like vegetation and encourage habitat, but also be like materials that we need? So I'm doing some kind of like wild experiments with rammed earth and digital fabrication. I installed something at Cedar Creek Ecosystem Science Reserve and have been working with Caitlin Potter out there on some small scale installations going back out there in a couple of weeks to install more rammed earth pieces, which is essentially soil, sand, like soil, sand, and clay, and sometimes you use cement as a binder, and then you kind of compact it into a block, and kind of thinking about like design blocks that can do multiple things as well. So I don't know how long I've been talking for, but that feels like about 5 minutes. So I think it's Richard's turn.
Jessica, thank you so much. I am so interested in everything you just said. I feel like we may need some visual aids if questions come up. Richard, I'm gonna finish off our round of introductions.
Great, thanks, Carly. Yes, I'm Richard Graves. I'm an associate professor in architecture, and I also direct the Center for Sustainable Building Research. And we do a lot of work kind of in sustainability and resilience, and kind of the core of our work is really regenerative design. So how do you think of buildings and sites as living systems? And so kind of historically, if you think of buildings and sites as a living system, it sort of ought to get you resilience and sustainability for the most part. So that's how we approach all this work. We do work kind of with B3 and the Minnesota Sustainable Building Guidelines. So all guidelines that kind of give targets for state-funded construction, including some things that work at times for our facility folks and sometimes that don't, but we've got the ability to have a feedback loop and improve those things over time. We've also done some research work for MPCA and other groups on resilience and kind of thinking of infrastructure as living systems and the benefits of that. And then we're currently working on, with the Lawrence Berkeley Lab, we're working on adding resilience to ASHRAE Code 189, which is kind of the sustainability code and sustainability into the building code. So that's kind of some exciting work of what are the things that are so obvious to do for resilience that we ought to be making every kind of built environment project do them. So in terms of the types of work, the work for MPCA on kind of living system design kind of led to a series of building prototypes that look at kind of high performance building systems in different ways. Long story short, it really showed the value of coupling energy storage systems and water storage systems into those types of buildings that we normally don't do for sustainability. But if we think of these buildings and sites kind of dealing with changes, those storage systems have a lot more value. We're also had a long run trying to get resilience integrated into the Minnesota Sustainable Building Guidelines. In the last legislative session, it's now the Minnesota Sustainable and Resilient Building Guidelines. So now we can work on resilience. It seems like a brain damage at times doing stuff with the legislature, but that work is kind of moving forward. And what that entails is working with the Minnesota Climate Adaptation Partnership to use their downscaled Minnesota weather data and plug that into how do we do energy models, how do we do site and water models, and what are the tools, engineers, architects, landscape architects, civil engineers use to model these things, and how do we get better data. Also, as part of that work, we're kind of rethinking beyond energy efficiency, how we think of building envelopes. It's not just energy efficiency. How do we think of building and insulating them to resist heat during heat waves and other changes? We also, as part of that work, have developed a county level resilience planning tool where you can put in data and it sort of finds data from NOAA, FEMA, and all these various fragmented agencies and collects them in one place so you can kind of do risk planning and scenario planning for projects in any county in Minnesota. That's kind of at the beta level tool. So we're really interested in working with people to kind of test and update that tool over time. And in my 1 minute and 5 seconds left, the last thing is we're doing a grant project from the legislature, and this is in collaboration with, again, Heidi Roop and the folks from Minnesota Climate Adaptation Partnership, and also Jessica Hellman at INE. And this is, we've been we've nicknamed this grant the Distill the Ocean grant because it's trying to like do way too many things and it's way too complicated. But basically, our ask from the legislature was for us to look at future weather trends and determine infrastructure's role in supporting agriculture. Here comes the Distill the Ocean part. Supporting forests, agriculture, natural habitats, and water quality to deal with Minnesota's future challenges. So super complicated. It's probably going to be kind of a policy setting document that's going to outline a whole bunch of future research that's needed because it's way too complicated. And we're doing some kind of dynamic system models in those different spaces and looking at how infrastructure can kind of interact with these systems. The really big, and I'm over my time by a few seconds, but the big deal with that grant is it's actually the first time the legislature has defined natural systems as infrastructure. So it's a place where we can start to leverage forests, wetlands, parks, and other things and kind of value their role that they do to support us like other kind of gray infrastructure, which is kind of a big deal and probably barely noticed, but we can leverage that in the future. Sorry, Carly, 30 seconds over.
Richard, I'll let it slide just this time. Well, thank you to all of our amazing panelists. I think we have such a wealth of knowledge here on this call, so I would love to now turn it over to our participants to start some dialogue and start asking some questions. I know I have plenty of questions, but I'd like to give our participants a chance first. So feel free to just unmute yourself and hop right in. So it looks like we've got something in the chat. We can start there. Okay, so Caitlin says the beta level tool being mentioned, I'm assuming that's are looking at all the different sources of data to look at how temperature and rainfall, weather, etc. Does that allow folks to plan with more recent data than just the historic floodplains type data?
I think that's in reference to the planning tool. So it's right now it's kind of a mixed bag because depending upon what agency you're getting the data sources from, some of it's updated, some of it isn't. That's the kind of challenge. Some of it appears to be updated, but then when you have someone like Heidi look at it, she says, "Oh, well, that's garbage. It's not really updated." So anyway, it at least kind of puts it all in one place, which is a challenge for planners now because you're trying to, there's so much information again across federal websites, state websites, those kinds of things. The intent was at least you had kind of one starting point that then you could kind of use that as a platform to do your kind of risk identification. It's also meant to be something you use as part of a workshop to do scenario planning. So you can tap into the kind of neighborhood and people working on the ground, their embedded knowledge of risks they know that's beyond just the abstract data. And that can get integrated into the planning process, which I think is really important too.
We've got another question in the chat. What recommendations do each of the panelists have for undergraduates who want to get involved with their work? That was a question I had as well. Anybody want to jump in with that one?
Well, we're hiring undergrads as RAs, so that's one way to get involved. We have job postings up, so look for those.
I'd like to add to that. This is Andrew from Campus Planning, and as someone who, while I was a student in the College of Design, I was an RA and a TA. I can't upvote Tom's suggestion enough. You get great experience, invaluable experience with practitioners as well as researchers and grad students. So of course that. I would also say, based on my experience in campus and climate action planning, look for committees. If you see an opportunity to share your voice in a survey or a committee advising a process like campus planning or really anything, I say join. I know that it's hectic. It's busy being a student. Your time's not your own sometimes, but I'm frankly disappointed and surprised at how few undergrad students I've encountered who have the capacity and just the ability to commit time to planning and sustainability work, but then also I guess the passion to do it. It's tough to get people's interest on things like campus and climate action planning sometimes, but to join the people who self-select are really passionate about it. And so the second thing I would suggest is just network broadly outside your area of focus or expertise. Just meeting other folks, working with folks with other deep expertise is so enriching. So a couple of general suggestions, I suppose.
And I'll just add, Carly and I are also working on, we defined cross-cutting initiatives across both climate action plans. And so we have been assembling further research questions, further opportunities for internships, learning projects, and we've already hosted some webinars, but we're getting it all collected online so that students and faculty can look at what do we need to know further to advance this work. And there's going to be so many enriching opportunities for students and all of that. We had a lot of interns as part of our climate action planning, and I've had students show up at my door saying, I want to be a climate intern, and I found him a project. And now Andy Erickson and I are working together on some great things as well. So literally just raising your hand and showing up, we've got things to get involved in.
Thank you, guys.
I'll add, I can't also recommend enough undergraduate research opportunities and internships. That's a super way to get involved and learn from different people. And don't be afraid to venture maybe outside of your discipline. So if you're in the College of Design, look for opportunities like I have in CSE and College of Science and Engineering. Those can be great ways to build and broaden your experience. I'd also say look for classes. I mean, mostly they're going to be electives, but there's a number of classes that cover some of these things and that get into some of these topics beyond the fundamental baseline. But most of those are going to be electives, but look for them. There are some good opportunities out there for classes. But the only other thing I'd add, and this is something that I participated in, and it was so valuable that I can't not recommend it, but look for student contests and competitions. There are many, many opportunities to get involved, and look for groups, or if there are no groups, build a group and create a group and go for it, because those are amazingly rewarding opportunities. Even if you don't win, you can make lifelong connections, building networks. That's huge. So you can build some lifelong connections. You can develop a lot of experience, and you get practice with that really those kind of skills, you can't learn that in a class. There's a lot of those classes that you'll take forward in your career, throughout your career, and you'll use it in a variety of different ways. So don't be afraid, go for it. You don't have to win. It's okay. You learn a lot and you actually get more out of it. And if you win, that's kind of a bonus icing on the top. So that's all I'll say.
Yeah, I just wanted to second really quick what Andy said, particularly with the UROP, the undergrad research projects. If you're interested in the work someone's doing, talk with them and see if there's an opportunity to do a UROP, because then you get paid to do research and you get to engage with faculty members or whoever, whether it's us or someone else whose work you're really interested in, and pursue something related to the research, but also what you're really interested in as well. So I think that's a really great opportunity.
And just adding to this, I think inherently this is all interdisciplinary research. So whatever discipline you're in, it has a contribution. Anything to do with GIS, like GIS, that's where a ton of the data is. And then oddly enough, anyone who knows Python scripts, never did I think I would have a request for this, but all this future energy weather file, like whatever way we slice it as we're trying to shift it from one thing to the other, I'll take every person who knows how to do Python scripts I can possibly find. So send them my way, and then I'll send them Heidi's way, because that is something we don't have enough capacity to do some of this data manipulation. And then maybe you'll explain what the heck that means to me as I find you and pass you on to Heidi.
Oh, I would also need a translator with that one, Richard. Andrew, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I already talked, so I thought I should hold up my hand. I totally agree with what Richard said. I mean, learn something that makes you invaluable. But something that I didn't do enough as a student for sure was just like informational interviews. It's free. and like just reach out. And it's a campus, and there's so many smart and interesting people doing interesting things. Have a coffee. Informational interviews is I wish I'd done more of that as an undergrad.
I second that, Andrew. And folks can always reach out to our office, the Office of Sustainability. I am more than happy to talk with students and try to help to connect them to projects and opportunities that make sense. So always reach out to us as a resource. A very similar question, how can current UMN employees support all of these various projects? So even thinking about maybe folks who are not in faculty positions, folks who are in staff positions. Any thoughts there?
Maybe I'll jump in first since I was just talking and I can be brief. And those who've done public planning and design work, especially, I think this might resonate with them. For any initiative or project, it's very often that the yes votes, the people in support of it, don't show up. They think that's a great idea. Good on you. If you agree with something like a commitment that the university's made, an initiative, if you think it's great that there's a sustainability office, that we're institutionalizing the commitment to sustainability and resilience, say so. Like just, write a short note to leadership and say, I think this is great. It's really simple, but you'd be surprised how motivated people are who are opposed to something to say something about it, and how silent often the yes votes are.
I think that's a great suggestion, Andrew, and I totally agree. You often hear the negative way more than you hear the positive. So yeah, look into those things. And if you're not aware of something, if you see something and you're curious about it, don't be afraid to ask questions and find out more about it. Like, what is going on with this? Like, and this is something I don't recognize. So what's being built here and what's its purpose? So look into those, dig into that, find out more, see who's working on it. If you are involved as an employee, if you're involved in education at all, try to think about ways that you can incorporate some of the things you see on campus as part of your classes to get more undergraduates aware of what's going on around them. Many other things we're talking about today and the research that we've all kind of explained are in the landscape all around us all the time. And many people don't even realize what it is. So, building awareness, we in this call likely do, but building awareness with the rest of those around us can only really benefit and get more support. And, people will be surprised of what these things do and what they're for and the many benefits they can provide. So, engage that curiosity and follow through with it. And try to find out, who's working on it and build those networks too.
Thank you, Andy. I want to hop in with a quick shameless plug here. So our office has a couple different ways that any employee on campus can get involved in some of this work, sustainability and climate action in a more broad way. One is through our Living Labs program. So I just threw a link in the chat. Any faculty, staff, or student can propose what we are calling a Living Labs project. This does not just have to be, building a garden. You really can kind of think outside the box here in any way that you're using our campus as a test bed for some sort of sustainability related project. So that is a great way to get involved in this work if this is something you're passionate about. Another thing I want to just really quickly plug, a great way to get involved is through serving on our Twin Cities Sustainability Committee. Richard is one of our current members. We currently have a call out for new members, so if that's of interest, that link is in the chat as well.
I just wanted to second something that Andy was saying, that a lot of our work, particularly in the landscape, also building, when talking about building systems, is invisible, right? Like it doesn't jump out that it's doing these performative things or it's doing all these different things. And I think that's what makes, in particular, things with landscape and water really challenging, because a lot of it is like kind of within a material section. So it's like in the depth of something and that's how it performs, or it's, if you know what you're looking for, it's visible, but if you don't, it's invisible. And in particular with landscape, like it's all designed too. So I think just kind of knowing that and being able to, like, when you talk about, and that's how we talk about things, and that's how we kind of advocate for our work. It's like it's designed, it's performing in a particular way, even though it might be invisible, but it's doing all these other things. So that's both a challenge, but it also, just making people aware of that, I think brings more depth and just understanding to the stuff that we do.
Just want to add one quick thing. I come from 15 years of experience at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, where I started this work, and staff were always extremely central to the the initiatives. In fact, sometimes I probably went straight in that direction when a lot of initiatives on a campus don't reach out to staff. You are the stewards of this campus. In HR, you're the steward of the talent we bring in. You're the steward when you are in land care, when you're a custodian. Like being the stewards of these places, these campuses is just so critical. So your input and awareness of these issues just becomes vital, I think, to any kind of central office of sustainability. I just want to say that. And I've been here 15 months and I'm discovering what that might look like here as well. So I think there's a lot more to come in reaching our staff too.
Yeah. Well, and I would also say, kind of from a researcher's perspective, building on that, I think a lot of times as researchers, we really focus on the kind of ecological things or technology, but we really under focus on the social aspects of whatever it is we're trying to figure out. And that's kind of an essential part of having a intelligent feedback loop on these complex issues. And so, the staff around the campus and our community are just full of kind of embedded knowledge about these things kind of in the past. And then anything that we're proposing for the future ought to be kind of co-developed, co-designed with them in mind, kind of leveraging that embodied knowledge. And we're not good at that. We ought to get better at it. And, I think us at the University of Minnesota, we ought to be really good at it because we generally work well with each other and ought to be able to kind of co-evolve, co-design in a productive way. So I think it's an opportunity for us.
Also, I'll just add, I mean, we all live in places, so take your interest in this knowledge to your neighborhoods and act in your local spaces. I was with a neighborhood group this morning before this meeting out on a site. They're interested in how to bring sustainability issues to their local neighborhood. So apply it where you live as well.
In our final 15 minutes, what other questions do we have for our panelists?
I'd like to ask a question. Since I'm, new here and I'm learning everybody, I see familiar faces, but unfamiliar faces. This is very interdisciplinary, as you'll see in the next few coffee chats, we will be talking about campus community, which is essential workers and vulnerable populations. Just as much as today, we're talking about stormwater and building infrastructure. Where do you see all of this potentially coming together in a more sustained way? Like, is there a space that exists now that we can enhance? What would it look like to be generating this interdisciplinary work as we start to implement a climate resilience plan for the campus?
One thing that has been proposed, so we're redoing the core curriculum of the university, and we've embedded the Sustainable Development Goals into the core curriculum. And so every student is going to learn about the SDGs, and they're going to be charged with applying it over their 4 years here. And then there's a capstone project that they have to do that's related to that. So we're going to see roughly 7,000 students a year learning about resilience in various forms and needing to do work on it. And so I think one of the opportunities we have here at this university is think about how do we leverage all of that interest, all of that, desire and need to do work. So I think thinking about how this work relates to the core curriculum of the university is certainly one opportunity, I think.
Other questions? If not, I have plenty.
I have one for Jessica. I already asked a question, but it sounds like a lot of the stuff you work on like you said, it's somewhat simple, but I think it's something that could really be implemented small scale. Like for example, Tom mentioned in neighborhoods or in like a living lab project. Is there somewhere where outside of like publications as they come about, is there somewhere that people can get information about the materials and the things that you create and how they could implement them in their own backyard even?
That's interesting, kind of like a how-to manual almost. Yeah, that'd be really interesting. I haven't quite gotten there, and the research work that I've been doing is like really broadly interdisciplinary. So I've been looking at also like both historic and contemporary uses. So looking all the way back at historic and indigenous uses to kind of more technological, like thinking about pavement assemblies and thinking about more kind of engineering solutions. So it's been collected from a really wide source, which I think is really interesting because it does show that some of the techniques are used globally, and they're all pretty similar, even though they do act really differently. So there isn't like a source I could point you to. I think doing like a how-to manual or like an IKEA booklet would be super fun of like how to do some of these things in the backyard, your backyard or street, or like how do you kind of take some of this stuff and apply it. So I don't know, that might be coming. I might be doing that soon. So thank you for that. Yeah. And I don't know if you want to come out to Cedar Creek and look at some stuff. You're welcome to come out there.
Yeah.
So we're only 45 minutes. It's only 45 minutes away.
Yeah, for real. And it when you were talking about like the clay soil bricks, it just reminded me like around 45 minutes northeast of here, where they turned wetlands into farmland, and then that farmland became kind of large plots for people to live on. That's almost exactly the soil type. So somehow, like, obviously wetlands are used to kind of collect water and prevent it from running where it's not supposed to. So being able to implement something like the bricks that you were talking about could be huge in neighborhoods like that.
Cool. Yeah, and it's something that I'm really interested in too with some of the materials is like using materials that are found on site rather than kind of importing materials from really, really far away. So like that kind of like on-site material, how do you kind of like use things, and how do you dig and then make kind of things on site with that same process and kind of a smaller scale versus importing things from far away or using really carbon intensive materials. So I think, yeah, we're same wavelength there, Kayla. Love it.
I'll probably be emailing you after this.
For sure. Yeah, I'll put my email in the chat.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Connections being made. This makes me happy. Cassidy has a great question in the chat. In terms of interdisciplinary work, I'm wondering if there is any technology on the horizon that has the potential to make sustainability work more streamlined.
I'll actually dive in on this because this showed up in some of the work that I have been doing, and one of the technologies that we've been evaluating are smart systems. We have the Internet of Things and smart systems in our homes, in our cars, and all over the place. We're seeing this interconnectivity through technology all around us, and we can also apply this to how we think about sustainable urban systems, especially. And from my perspective, where I'm coming in the stormwater world, there are smart systems being implemented to manage the storage and the flow of stormwater. So we have smart ponds, we have smart wetlands, we have smart storage systems, we have smart rainwater harvesting systems. And when I'm saying smart, it depends on the application of the particular practice. But in a storage system, what the smart system does is it looks at the forecast and it says, well, if it exceeds a certain % chance of rainfall, and that rainfall is going to exceed a certain amount or depth, then we are going to preemptively or proactively, before the rainfall, try to maximize how much storage we have so that we can capture more of that rainfall before the rain actually happens. This is in systems where you might have an existing permanent pool of water, a wet pond, for example. But it's also being used on dry systems. it actually will close a valve on dry systems so that it doesn't restrict the flow. It completely stops the flow and allows that dry system to fill up completely before, at a controlled rate, it allows the water to discharge, and that can minimize flooding. And we're doing this because we're seeing more extreme events in our rainfall records today than we did historically. But we're also using smart systems in our rainwater harvesting, our reuse systems. More and more of these things are becoming automated and interconnected. And I see that only continuing to grow. I'm seeing instances where it's related to water, but it's going to interconnect with other things related to energy and other building processes. That's only going to continue to accelerate. So that's one area that's going to continue to grow. Richard mentioned Python. There's so much work in coding and programming that we need. The algorithms needed to do these systems are absolutely foundational and critical. So any kind of fundamental coding experience is helpful, even if you don't want to be a software coder as your full-time job. But I'll leave it at that.
So if there are any students on this call, what I hope you're hearing is that any field and any career can really be a sustainability career. This work is so incredibly interdisciplinary, so don't feel like you need to get a degree in sustainability or even in the sciences to be involved in this work. Oops, so it was muted. Another question in the chat. Do you ever need our code work done?
Yes. It is being used.
Perfect.
Ours is definitely being used as well, quite a bit.
Any other examples of technology that folks want to highlight?
Yeah, I mean, some of my work in, creating tiles has been using some digital fabrication technologies. So modeling things in Rhino really precisely. And then, once you have that model, you can either CNC using the CNC router to mill it out of a piece of solid material, or I actually just got a grant to get a ceramic 3D printer. So we could be printing things with ceramics. And it's also like a super flexible tool. I know, I'm like so excited. It just came in. We don't even know how to use it yet. But I'm really excited about it. But there's people doing like really awesome work. It's apparently super flexible, and you can 3D print with sawdust and rubber and like earthen materials in addition to clay and all this other stuff. So I think some of that potential with fabrication, and the things that I'm interested in, I'm hoping we'll get it set up so I can play this summer, because I'm really excited for it. She can tell.
And existing systems are also changing. I mean, I mentioned the GIS related work that we're doing and how increasingly it's being used, not just as an analytical tool, but as a speculative, future-oriented design tool, so that we're starting to think about how GIS can help us run through and analyze future possibilities. And then the linking, for example, of GIS into Autodesk's technology so that you can do these things across scales. I think are all ways in which existing technologies are changing in response to the sustainability issues we face.
Could are those two ideas or three ideas linked to me back to I'm curious about Cassidy's question and that the idea of streamlining. There are a lot of ways that you could interpret that. And in my work anyway, I work closer to policy and broader strategic vision. And so I think one way, it's not maybe streamlining, but scaling up to what Tom was talking about, scaling up an idea. If something is a good idea, a sustainability measure, a piece of technology, a hack sometimes, I try to work with my colleagues to make sure that they aren't one-offs. A good idea on a project, if it deserves to be policy or a design standard, or I think there should be discussion of that across, so that it's standardized across the institution. I think I wouldn't call it streamlining, but it's scaling up or institutionalizing any kind of measure so that not everything is hand carry one-off. That's how I would interpret or respond to Cassidy's question.
Also, the ability to make decisions faster. I think some technology just allows us to make decisions or test how potential implications of decisions and kind of evaluate that versus having to, maybe try it and then wait and see. The ability to simulate things and make decisions faster, I think is a good, tying on what Andrew was saying.
Yeah,
I was
so
just, oh,
you know,
go ahead, go ahead.
so I mean, two things with the kind of one streamlining thought, one technology thought. So in terms of streamlining, one of the things we're really interested in terms of things like the B3 guidelines and metrics is we've kind of had this long history with guidelines of collecting a lot of stuff and thinking everything matters. And we're really interested in getting more to like vital signs of indicators of kind of health sustainability, which would potentially have more robust, kind of connected performance indicators of things. And then as we did that, we might have fewer things we're tracking because we know other kind of benefits or good things. If we get some indicators that show up positive, we'll get other ones as kind of add-on effect. So it's kind of a complicated thing, but we're trying to get out of this trend of um, just trying to track 100 things that makes things more complicated and not necessarily robust, quick, and nimble. I think is going to be a future trend. And then just random technology thing, totally unrelated to what I just said. We're also really interested in a thing called overcoating buildings, where you kind of laser scan the outside of buildings and then you can reskin them with smarter skins that have more insulator properties and things like that. We've been doing single family homes here, but the Germans are like reskinning 12-story buildings with like crazy high-tech stuff. And like we want to, I don't know. I'm trying to push my team who's been doing the rescanning of single family homes. Like, why can't we do like huge complicated things as because I think there would be a lot of value to that, particularly in the university's sustainability plan, where we've got a bunch of buildings that were like, man, I don't know what to do with those. If you could reskin them, maybe that's something you could do with those.
All right. Well, we are just about at time here. I want to say a huge thank you to all of our panelists for taking time out of your schedules that I know are busy to be here with us today, and to all of our audience members for being here and listening and creating some really great dialogue. As I mentioned, this is the first event in an Earth Month series. I'm just going to throw a quick slide up so you are able to see what we have coming up. I am really excited about these next two sessions as well. So on April 17th, we will be having our next session on climate resilience and the environment. Great speakers lined up for this one. And then finishing up on Earth Day on Monday, 4/22, climate resilience and the campus community. So that one will be more focused on people and public health, these types of things. So if these are of interest, I just threw a link in the chat to our Coffee Chat site where you can go and register. So thank you all so much for being here. And this recording will be posted to our website maybe by the end of the day tomorrow, maybe early next week. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.